So the Browns have officially made the change at play caller. We've talked about this earlier this week with them going from from Kevin Stefanski to Tommy Rees. Now, play calling is one of those things that the internet takes and runs with in a completely wild direction, oftentimes, where people make it seem like the playbook or who gets to call the plays is controlling the entire outlook of the offense. I have for a very long time on this channel contended that, sometimes we get a little bit too caught up in who's calling the plays or the play calling because of the result of what's happening instead of like talking about the process of why things are going down, right? We don't do enough conversation about the play sheet. We talk more about the play calling. And I think the play calling is, less consequential than what the actual play sheet is. One thing that has been noted in this transition to Tommy Rees is that not only will Tommy Rees be calling the plays, Tommy Rees will also be getting the final say on what goes on the play sheet. So that's a bigger change there. Now, it's nice to have some clarification on how the Browns operate. It does seem like whoever the play caller is gets the final say on what goes on the play sheet. But given that there is this kind of mythos around play calling, I wanted to talk about some realistic expectations of change that could happen because the play caller is different. Now, again, I want to be very careful here and very clear. Just because these changes could happen does not mean that Tommy Rees is guaranteed to be a good enough play caller to access these changes. It might be the case that Tommy Rees is a worse play caller than Kevin Stefanski. I honestly don't know. It does not seem like he has a ton of play calling experience. Even at the college football level, he seemed to have like a couple of years of it at Notre Dame. It's unclear what his situation and setup was at Alabama, given that everything goes through Nick Saban, offense and defense at Alabama. So I'm not really sure how experienced he is as a play caller. I don't really know what to expect with Tommy Rees as a play caller, but here are things that can change because a play caller is different or can look different because a play caller is different. We're going to talk about that in just a second, but real quick, let me thank my sponsor, Sleeper. Real quick, just want to let you guys know Sleeper has a new offer here. They're offering a free $20 entry, no deposit required. And also, if you're a first-time user, you also will receive a 100% match on up to $100 when you use the promo code WORSTTAKE. Again, $20 free, no deposit required. Plus, first-time users also receive a 100% deposit match up to $100. Join Sleeper. Okay, so the first thing that can change because the play caller is different is the one thing I really do expect to be different this week: tempo, right? The tempo of the offense. The Browns' offense this year has had some success, albeit meager, but still their success when they've been in more up-tempo situations this year. This has been pointed out by me. The last 2-minute offense for Dillon Gabriel seems to be where he's at his best for whatever reason. Now, there's a danger in going up-tempo, right? Like oftentimes we talk about, hey, they should do this without addressing the fact that everything that you do in football has a downside to it, right? The downside to tempo is if you're not scoring, if you're not getting first downs, you're going to tire out your defense twice as fast as you would if you weren't running tempo. And that's probably why the Browns have not been running a ton of tempo, because they've been trying to preserve the energy of the defense as much as possible. And there's a difference between going 3 and out and taking off 2 minutes of game time and going 3 and out and taking off 7 seconds, right? A lot of the hallmarks of Kevin Stefanski's play calling strategy is him trying to win the time of possession battle. That's something that Kevin finds to be very important. Where Tommy Rees places that, I don't know. The Browns, outside of the New England game, have actually been doing a pretty decent job, given how bad their offense is, of maintaining time of possession, right? They've been close to 50-50, if not outright winning the time of possession battle the last 4 weeks of the season, and pretty much for most of the season. The obvious exemption being last week versus the New England Patriots, where the Browns absolutely got demolished in time of possession because they turned the ball over a ton. So they're going to probably go up tempo. They're going to probably lose time of possession because of that. We'll see what that does to the offense, if that injects some life into the passing offense. I think there's some more things that they could probably do to try to inject some life into the passing offense. But understand, this is going to come at the risk of the defense. Like, the defense is going to suffer more than likely if the Browns make these changes to try to inject life into the offense, because it's going to create more possessions for the defense to have to stop. It's going to tire them out more often than not when you go up tempo. If the Browns decide to spread the ball out and throw the ball downfield, that's inevitably going to put the ball at risk more often, which means more turnovers for the defense to deal with. There is going to be a downside. I would expect, if the Browns went all in on trying to inject some life on some offense, that this is where you start to see things like the defense take a hit because of it. Nothing is free in football. You got to make your choices, right? You got to choose. What would you rather take between two options? Oftentimes, nothing is free. So that's the choice there. I expect them to put more up-tempo stuff in the offense. I expect them to run more tempo during this game. Will that have great results? Well, it depends on the execution. If they're able to get down the field, score touchdowns, and obviously nobody's going to care about the fact that we're putting the defense out there a little bit more. But if they're not putting up points and they're going 3 and out, but now going 3 and out faster, well, then that's an obvious problem. But tempo is going to be something I think they're going to go to. The second thing I think can realistically change is less predictable tendencies overall. I think Kevin, who usually is not a super predictable play caller, sometimes Kevin can get kind of stuck in his ways and be a little predictable. But I think this year he's been especially predictable. And I'm sure if you ask the people in the building, they will tell you he's predictable because his options are limited, right? He doesn't have the ability to go to all of these counter punches and all of these tendency breakers because he doesn't have the horses to execute it. I don't know if I fully 100% buy that. I think there's more you can do than what Kevin's done. But you can be a little bit more spontaneous now that Tommy Rees is in there. Kevin, just by virtue of him being the offensive play caller for this team for the last 5 years and him being the head coach of this team for the last 5 years, there is a ton of tape available on what Kevin Stefanski likes to do. Almost 100 games available of Kevin Stefanski to research if you're trying to figure out what his tendencies are as a play caller. What does he like to go to? What plays does he like to go to? There's just a lot more information out there on Kevin Stefanski than there is on Tommy Rees, which means that, they're going to be, in theory, less prepared for what Tommy Rees and his tendencies are, because right now there's not a lot of tape on his tendencies. So it's a lot harder to prepare for that. So maybe that's something that injects some life to the offense, right? Again, his tendencies are out there. We all know what they are. We've watched it for 5 years. Other teams have watched it for 5 years. They know what Kevin likes to go to in specific situations. They know what Kevin likes to go to when he doesn't feel confident about his quarterback. They know what Kevin likes to go to when he has confidence in his run game. Kevin has been around for a while, which means there's a lot of information out on him. Doesn't mean that he's completely cooked or anything like that, even though I do think he needs to freshen it up significantly, because right now it's so stale that I don't think you could justify keeping Kevin any longer than the end of this season. But If you're Tommy Rees, that's an advantage for you, right? They're going to come in prepared for those Kevin Stefanski things. I think in the first couple of weeks, you can really take advantage of these tendencies that teams have developed going against Kevin because they're so familiar with his tendencies. You can maybe have some success with some tendency breakers and some trick plays, and really break things for the opposing defense this week and maybe next week. They're going to catch on eventually, but it will be something that's fun in the short term. So that's another thing that will be different with a different play caller. Number 3, more spread, maybe even some RPO. I know that like Dylan is a super experienced quarterback and everybody is telling me that, we should treat him like a 5-year pro or whatever. I don't really care for the arguments for or against Dylan right now. I'm pretty over all of the quarterbacks that we've had to talk about this year for the Cleveland Browns and ready to move on to a different conversation. But if we're talking about Dylan Gabriel and where his experience is in college, he was a spread quarterback for the most of his time. He did RPO stuff, quick release stuff, quick read stuff. And right now, the Browns are asking him to do a lot of quick game in the condensed part of the field without any options to really spread the ball out downfield. So maybe you get him in more of a spread look, maybe more of a college style look instead of kind of the strict pro style West Coast offense looks that the Browns have had him in. Maybe even some RPO stuff, not read option. He's not a read option quarterback. And that's going to be interesting to see how Tommy Rees deals with it, because I think this is the first time he's had a quarterback who at this level of football is just straight up not a threat to run it. Like Dylan Gabriel's not a threat out the backfield as a runner, maybe a little bit as a scrambler, but he's not even that great at that. And Shedeur, I think coming out of Colorado, was probably seen as maybe even worse of an athlete than Dylan. Like, I don't know if that's true. Haven't really seen them side to side, but they're comparable athletes from what you see on tape from both of them. I wouldn't say that one looks like a more spectacular athlete than the other. I think they were pretty similar at the college level, and we see how, Dylan was a legit runner at Oregon at times for that offense, and then you see in the NFL, it ain't happening, right? The speed difference on defense is just so big in the NFL that you can't really utilize any of these guys as direct runners. They're just not that kind of quarterback. So that's going to be interesting how Tommy Rees handles that, because he's usually had those guys when he's been the play caller. I think even at Notre Dame, the year they made the playoff and lost to Alabama, he had a mobile quarterback in there. Correct me if I'm wrong. I might be completely off on that. But somebody tell me who the Notre Dame quarterback was in 2022, I believe, when Notre Dame made the playoff with Tommy Rees as the OC. So it's going to be interesting to see how he handles that. Obviously, at Alabama, he had Jalen Milroe the whole time. Maybe some RPO stuff would be nice. I think it'll be a nice change of pace. Teams aren't really expecting it. It's not something the Browns have run. It's not something that Kevin has run. I think it might be a nice little change of pace. You might be able to get some RPO stuff. The question is like, hey, is Dylan going to be able to see it with how tall everybody is now in the NFL and how short he is? The fourth thing I think we have a chance to do differently is just better timing on the play action play calls. Kevin has never really had a great grasp at the feeling of when to call a play action or not. He doesn't really have a great feel for it. There's been times where he's called a play action. It was perfect timing. There's been a lot of times where I've been like, man, I would love a play action right here, and we're just not going to it. And then they go to a play action way too late in the down, like after a couple of failed runs where the run game's not going to have the same amount of gravity. Maybe Tommy Rees has a better feel for that. That was something that he did do really well with Jalen Milroe in 2023, albeit completely different style of play action that he did with Jalen Milroe, but still better timing on when to call that. So maybe that's something that gets better here. Look, I don't want to mislead anybody about the nature of the changes of play calling. It's not going to completely overhaul the offense. It's not going to completely change what we've been seeing on Sundays. There's going to be a lot of stuff that existed before the play calling change that will exist after the play calling change. I think a lot of the Browns' problems are straight up bigger than a play calling change. I think they're bigger than a quarterback change, unless we're talking about a top 7 quarterback stepping in here. It's bigger than that. Like, these problems are large, and I don't think they're going away anytime soon. Maybe there's some things you could do to make it better for the time being, but let's be real. Changing play callers when your offense has been this bad for the reasons that the offense has been this bad is kind of akin to changing deck chairs on the Titanic. It might make things more comfortable for the time being, but the boat's still sinking. It ain't doing shit for the boat sinking. And look, I hate to be negative here, but I do have to be honest about what I'm watching, right? Can't just sit here and say, oh, they're changing the play caller, Browns fans, tune in, we're going to be different. No, we're not. Like, there's going to be bigger problems here than I anticipate a play caller change can make. Now, I hope I'm wrong. I hope that the play calling change does do a lot and we see a completely different offense and, we're happy with what we're seeing on Sundays. But I just have not seen that be the case very often with a play caller change. Usually it's a little bit better at first because you can, break those tendencies that teams have, especially when you got a guy established as Kevin Stefanski. Maybe it takes guys off guard, right? It's kind of like going to a backup quarterback where, because he's a different guy than your starter, teams get a little thrown off, but then eventually they catch up, right? I think that's probably what's going to happen. Maybe some early success here, but I think eventually teams are going to catch up to the tendencies that Tommy Rees has, and then we're going to run into similar issues again. And it happened last year with Ken Dorsey, right? They changed the play caller the first couple of weeks. There was some early success because the tendencies were different. But then once they caught on to the tendencies for, Ken Dorsey, things start to look real familiar again. So, I don't want to be super cynical here, but I do have to be honest. I don't have high hopes that this play caller change is going to change things. I think, we'll go from this and then eventually we're going to change the quarterback and maybe that'd be the next shot of hope here. But the problems on offense are just bigger than those two changes are going to probably be able to fix. Hope I'm wrong, but that's just where I'm at. Now if you're wondering, hey, if we're watching on Sunday and something's happening, how do we know that the play caller change might have been a mistake? There are 3 things I usually look for to see if a play caller is straight up bad. Usually it's not the result of the plays being called because that can happen for a number of reasons. Plays fail for a lot of different reasons, usually not because they're plays that shouldn't have been called right there. Usually it's because somebody falls, gets beat, or something like that, right? But there are 3 things I usually look for that are very indicative of bad play calling process. Number 1, if the play calls are coming in late this week, that's not a great sign, right? If you're constantly watching the Browns snap the ball within 3 seconds, that's a horrible sign. And it also gives an edge to the defensive line because now they don't even have to worry about timing the snap count. The snap count is being timed for them. The second thing is a lot of pre-snap penalties, a lot of guys not getting to the right. But that just means there's very unclear communication there coming from the headset, which is indicative of a bad play caller being in place. And number 3 is kind of related to the pre-snap penalties, a lot of wasted timeouts. If you see the Browns taking a lot of timeouts that aren't strategic just to get reset, that's telling you that there's probably a shit show going on in the headsets. We saw this with Miami, right, where Miami had to take a ton of timeouts. I think the same thing even happened with Minnesota, maybe. Was it Minnesota? Was it Minnesota or Pittsburgh? There was one team that we played that took a shit ton of timeouts too that weren't strategic. That's usually indicative of a shit show going on on the headsets, right? You can't get the play call in. You're arguing about the play call. You're arguing about personnel. Your coaches aren't getting the right personnel packages in. Just like logistical stuff that you don't really feel on Sundays unless they start calling these timeouts, because almost 90% of the time, that's why these timeouts are being called. So if you're seeing a lot of wasted timeouts, a lot of pre-snap penalties, and you're noticing that we're always getting the play off with the last 3 seconds of the clock, it's probably indicative that the play call change was a mistake if we see it for like a couple of weeks. But that's my thoughts on the play calling change. Again, I'm not trying to be a negative Nancy here. I'm not trying to be cynical just to be cynical. I would love nothing more for the Browns to shock me and be really good for the rest of the season. But I have to be honest about what I've seen this year. I have to be honest about what I'm watching when I watch this team on tape. And I can't sit here and tell you with a straight face that I think that these problems are so small that something like a play calling change can fix these issues. I think the Browns are going to likely need a offseason to sufficiently address these issues. And even in that offseason, they're going to have to make a lot of tough but correct decisions to get to that point. And I'm not confident that they're at the place to where they recognize that. We'll see what happens. But that's kind of my take on it. Let me know your take in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.